NBA draft fans, welcome back to the channel. Glad to be bringing another 2022 NBA mock draft to the channel today. I know this has been one of the most widely loved videos on the channel. I've been doing them weekly, and this is another rendition of my 2022 NBA mock draft. Please give me your thoughts and comments in the comment section today, and also leave a like on today's video if you have been enjoying. As you can see, my setup is a little bit different. I'm actually at my girlfriend's right now recording. The grind doesn't stop. I'm bringing you guys content whenever I can, so hopefully you do appreciate all the hard work that goes into these. And if you could show some love by hitting that subscribe button if you're new. And this 2022 NBA draft, I'm actually going to start here with a generic note, is one that I've actually really loved covering. You guys have been absolutely awesome. I have a ton of different scouting profiles up on the channel, so I do recommend checking those out. And it's just been a lot of fun covering it, not only because of the energy you guys all bring into the comment section, the amount of love we've been getting on the videos, but also just with how good the prospects are in this class. And I do want to just start with a generic note on how good this class is. When I'm going through these mocks, a lot of research, time goes into it. I try and consider fit and where these players, belong. And then there's also the draft value standpoint where, I've got a bunch of players who I think should be a lottery picks. I've got a whole bunch of players who should be top 20 picks. And I end up at pick 23 mocking a guy, and I'm like, wow, this seems way too low for him. But I go back up the list, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of good players in this class, and there's a lot of players that I feel like are going to be top 20 picks. In fact, I feel like there's almost too many guys that are worthy of a top 20 selection this year. So, going throughout this, it's going to maybe feel like a couple guys go too low, but it's just hard sliding some guys around because there's a lot of different ways that I think things could play out, and there's a lot of shakeups through my mocks week to week, just because I think there's so many different ways that teams could look at these players, and I'm trying to bring you the most realistic stuff. So again, I do hope you guys are enjoying the content. In this mock draft, again, we're based on standings. I'm not going to project any lottery stuff. The lottery is on May 17th. There's a video up on the channel explaining exactly how the lottery works. I'll try and put a card in today's video for that. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure to go check that video out. It goes into great depth about the odds of each team and exactly how everything could play out. And again, this is a mock, not a big board. I have a video up of my big board version 3. That's the latest one. So I do recommend checking that one out if you want to know my actual thoughts on all these prospects, because there is a pretty big divide here between how I actually feel about these players and where I could see them getting drafted. Then we also have off-season previews on the channel. So if you're a fan of, say, the Houston Rockets, Detroit Pistons, Sacramento Kings, Oklahoma City Thunder, whatever it is, we probably have an off-season preview on the channel. So go check that out as well. Moving into it now. Pick 1, the team with the worst record in the NBA was the Houston Rockets. They won 20 games this past year, so there's a lot of room for improvement. But luckily for Houston, they have 2 picks in the top 17. And the NBA draft order is fully fleshed out now from picks 15 through 30. We're just awaiting the lottery results for the top 4 selections, and then everything will be in line from there. So I am really excited. And here with Houston, the biggest thing for me is they got to get better defensively. They give up the most points in the NBA this year, and that's just not really going to get the job done. You're not going to be a playoff team giving up the most points in the league. And I do think that there's a lot of bright sides for this team moving forward. Jalen Green played awesome toward the end of the season. Kevin Porter Jr. really started figuring out the playmaking element of being a point guard, which we'll see. Maybe Houston does have interest in a point guard in this mock draft. I'm not going to specifically spoil that for you yet, but I think Houston, there's a lot of different ways they could look, but I think they have to get better defensively. There's 2 guys that really fit the bill here, and I'm going to start off with forward Jabari Smith from Auburn. The reason I think he makes the most sense here is he's a 6'10" forward who can shoot the 3 ball well. Of course, he's going to draw a lot of comparisons to Kevin Durant. Now, I don't think he's going to end up being KD long term, and almost no one ever has been. You're talking about one of the best players of all time. So Jabari Smith probably won't be Kevin Durant level, but there's going to be a lot of great spots to his game. He's a really good weak side rim protector. He's going to give a little bit more length and versatility defensively to Houston. I know I've talked about his shot blocking capabilities, but he's also pretty good on the perimeter. He's actually got pretty quick feet for him. He can contest outside with those long arms he's got. And I think offensively, the skill set's there. I think he's a little bit more of a projection first overall pick, whereas a guy like Paolo Banchero is probably a little bit further ahead in his offensive toolbox. But Jabari Smith, I think he can get there. And specifically when you look at him, he does have projectable skill set. When you look at a player who's able to shoot the 3 ball with efficiency like he does, and then also is able to finish around the rim, plays through contact at a pretty decent rate. I think he could get a little bit better in some of these areas, but at the same time, he's just a really great player. And I think a lot of people are going to start narrowing in on him as the #1 player in this class, even though that's not necessarily my own opinion. Moving on to pick 2, here we have Orlando, a team that's probably hoping Jabari Smith's available at their selection. We'll see if the lottery does bless them and give them the #1 overall pick. They do have a 14% chance of that. But here with Orlando now, we're looking at forward Paolo Banchero out of Duke. And again, this is the same as last week's mock so far, the start here with Jabari Smith and then Banchero. And the reasoning why here is I just think both of these teams need front court players, and I think they fit in their own specific way. Jabari Smith, a little bit better defensively than Banchero, and I think probably makes a little bit more sense with his length. For Houston than Orlando, I think they just need a half-court scorer, someone who they can actually give the ball to. Quite frankly, Cole Anthony had a pretty decent season, but he shot sub 40%, and a big reason why he just doesn't finish at the rim at an elite clip, specifically for the volume that he plays with this past year with Orlando. And I think they just need a better half-court scorer. For me, that's Paolo Banchero, very good half-court scorer, can play through contact, can finish at the rim, and I think is a more polished product than Jabari Smith, and I think he's got some high upside to him still. But the one question about him is athletically. How fast can he be? How quick can he be with the ball? Is he a little bit of a ball stopper? And then defensively, I don't think he's going to be on the same level as a Chet Holmgren or a Jabari Smith. But I think here, if you're Orlando, you're looking at yourself and saying, well, we do have Wendell Carter. We've got Mo Bamba, who's headed toward restricted free agency, but they're probably going to want to keep him. They also have Jonathan Isaac coming back from injury at some point, I would hope, in the near future. So Orlando's got defensive players. I think that they just need a half-court identity offensively, and I think Banchero, in his own right, is a half-court identity by himself. Moving on to pick 3, Detroit Pistons here, and this is where we have a little bit of a shakeup in the mock. Last week I mocked Jaden Ivey here, and you guys know how I feel about Jaden Ivey. I have a scouting profile up in the channel of him. I put a ton of time into that video, so I do recommend you check that out. But here with the Detroit Pistons 3rd overall, I actually decided to switch it up, and I went with Chet Holmgren here. And I know Pistons fans, some of you guys are going to hate this, some of you will love it. Let me give my explanation here before you start commenting, especially for those who hate it. The reasoning why I went with Chet Holmgren here is the Pistons do head into free agency here with around $25-ish million in cap space, give or take a couple $1 million. They have a lot of flexibility, and you also have Jeremy Grant as a trade chip. I think the Pistons definitely need more length in their front court. I think Pistons fans would agree with that. And I think they need another really good rim protector there. Chet Holmgren is both of those things. Very lengthy, 7'6" wingspan, protects the rim very, very well. Then also can step out and shoot the 3 ball. I think he and Cade Cunningham would have a phenomenal pick and roll, pick and pop combination game where maybe Cade and Chet are exactly what people thought Luka and Kristaps could be, where you have a dynamic pairing here. And Cade's a little bit more willing to play without the ball in his hands, unlike Luka. So this could make a lot of sense. Chet's a very skill-oriented player. I think he's a better passer than Kristaps. I think realistically, Chet's going to be a phenomenal player in the league. And the thing here is, if you're Detroit, you look at Isaiah Stewart, he's probably the perfect type of big to put next to Chet Holmgren, because you're going to put him on the more physical and physically demanding assignments. And you're going to have Chet Holmgren probably guard corner shooters and then work as a weak side rim protector off of that, grab a ton of rebounds, push the ball in transition. And I think Detroit going into free agency, you could look at a guy like Jalen Brunson, who, just had a 40 piece in the playoffs, probably makes him look even more appealing to a lot of teams. But I've been talking about this for a while, where Detroit could maybe go into free agency, look to find a 2-guard or a combo guard to work off of Cade. And then you go into the draft here, find a forward or a big. And it's very possible too, they could look at a Jeremy Grant trade. So Detroit has a lot of different options here. I think Chet Holmgren, if they don't go with Ivy, assuming Jabari Smith's off the board, I think Holmgren does make the most sense. Pick 4, we're at Oklahoma City now, and this is where the mock gets really, really interesting and really, really crazy, because I haven't had this outcome play out as much. And I know if this comes down to this way in the lottery, it's going to be really complex here, because if Oklahoma City has the 4th pick and Jabari, Banchero, and Chet are all off the board, it leaves Jaden Ivey here. I think that's the consensus top 4 for almost everyone. I've seen a few that don't have that, and I think that's ridiculous, because they usually have Jaden Ivey outside the top 4. I think that's a terrible take. But here, if I'm Oklahoma City, they took Josh Giddey 6th overall last year. They have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They also took Trey Mann near the lottery last year. So do you really go another guard? And in this mock, I actually don't think they do. I have them going with forward Keegan Murray out of Iowa. Now, this is where things get really weird, because I think Jaden Ivey is the best player available at this spot. And the fact that I have them going with Keegan Murray, that's the thing about drafting so many guards, is when you did draft Giddey and you draft Trey Mann, you do put yourself in a position where, hey, if there's a really good guard here, do we really have the availability to take him? And if you're Oklahoma City, you might be saying, oh yeah, they've got all these picks coming. Remember, those picks are coming from teams like the Los Angeles Clippers, most of those picks. They also have some picks from other teams, and they have picks from the Rockets, which maybe could be good. But you're looking at a team that they might not ever get a number 1 overall pick from this. So Should you go best player available? Maybe, but it's not like you're going to have all these other great options to pick up high-level forwards later on. And for me, Oklahoma City badly needs more front court play. I think they're going to look at themselves hard in the mirror here. I think this is really the toughest spot of the draft if you're Oklahoma City, with Ivy available, but also the massive front court need that they have. I have them going with Keegan Murray here. It does pain me in some way, but I think it's a realistic outcome that they do opt for a really good four in Keegan Murray, who can do a lot of nice things for you over a guard, just because they feel like they're so set at guard already. It's going to be a tough position, but it's a realistic outcome that could happen on draft night. Pick 5, Indiana Pacers here, and I think Pacers fans are going to have a massive smile on their face, because even though they just traded for Tyrese Halliburton, you get arguably the best player in the class this year in guard Jaden Ivey from Purdue. Of course, Indiana, they're going to love him there, no question about that. He's already got a lot of fans in state, if you know what I mean. So Jaden Ivey here to Indiana. I know some people might be saying, well, that's a questionable fit. You know, we just saw De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton maybe not work the best. Why would Jaden Ivey and Halliburton be any different? Well, the realism here with Indiana specifically is, one, this team needs talent. They haven't had a top 9 pick since 1989, which is finally going to change. So that's crazy. Last time they had a top 10 pick, they had the 10th overall selection, took Paul George. So they know what they're doing when they're up here, and they're just not going to miss out an opportunity to take Jaden Ivey. This isn't like Oklahoma City where they have 3 really great guards. You know, they've got Malcolm Brogdon, who they're going to look to trade, I would have to guess. Yes, they got Duarte. Yes, they've got Tyrese Halliburton, but realistically, Jaden Ivey, I mean, you just have to take the talent here if you're Indiana. It's just a different situation than Oklahoma City. I think Indiana doesn't have as pressing of a need as Oklahoma City when it comes to the front court. They still have Miles Turner. They've got Goga Bitadze. They've also brought in Jalen Smith, and I think Isaiah Jackson was a really good pickup last year as well. Indiana's got a little bit more flexibility, and if they just want to go best player available, I think that Jaden Ivey's here. You take him. I think this is going to be a pick that a lot of the fans love as well. Moving into pick 6, Portland Trailblazers here now. Obviously, they're very sad that the New Orleans Pelicans made it to the playoffs. It really did shake up how the mock drafts have been looking. But with Portland here now at 6, they're going to go ahead and take forward / guard Benedict Mathurin. And I know this maybe is going to be surprising to Portland fans, because I think the idea here for a lot of Blazers fans is, hey, let's grab a 4. But with Keegan Murray off the board, this has really shook everything up, you know, because I think realistically they're going to have it narrowed down probably between Benedict Mathurin and also at this point AJ Griffin, if that's what's available. Maybe they would look at Jalen Duren, but realistically I think that these are the 2 guys they would consider, because I think Nurkic is going to come back and they're going to try and win. And I think Mathurin, who's a sophomore player out of Arizona, can have a big impact on winning. Kind of reminds me of a combination between Mikal Bridges and Tim Hardaway Jr. Gets really good elevation on his jump shot, very athletic player, and I think has a lot of defensive upside. So if you're looking for a player who, you know, Portland badly needs more defensive help, Mathurin probably does get the job for you done on that end of the floor, and his athleticism off the ball with Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons, I think, is a really good answer into the swing position. Pick 7, Sacramento here now, and the Sacramento Kings, obviously in a weird spot. You know, they trade off Tyrese Halliburton. Domantas Sabonis could head toward free agency in about 2 years if he doesn't get a contract extension. And I think the Kings here, there's a lot of pressure on GM Monty McNair as well. So in order to answer that pressure, he's going to go with a player with massive and immense upside, because even if he's not the one being the GM there when it's all said and done, maybe he can build a legacy for drafting this kid, and that's guard / forward Shaedon Sharpe, who is technically at Kentucky, didn't play this year, and a lot of teams are expecting him to come out for the NBA draft. There's a lot of conflicting reports right now whether Sharpe is staying at college or if he's going to declare for the draft. My guess is he will come out for the draft. I've been including him in the last couple mocks, and I think I'm going to continue to do so moving forward until I have definitive proof that he is not. So for me with Shaedon Sharpe, you're looking at someone who has a really great athletic profile. He's about 6'6", one of the most athletic players I've ever watched. He consistently gets his head up and above the rim. So Sacramento, a team that badly needs some wing play, Shaedon Sharpe's going to do that for you, and I think he's going to be a phenomenal cutter off the ball when Domantas Sabonis catches at the high post. And realistically, this is a long-term swing for upside, where you try and find an opportunity here to build a big 3 around Fox and the Ox, and then you also add Shaedon Sharpe in there. So it's an intriguing trio. I'm not sure if it gets the job done in the Western Conference, specifically while Sharpe is young, but it's very possible that down the road, Sharpe could be a top 3 or 4 player from this class if everything pans out. There's also some risk here because he's a high school player. We don't have any college film on him. So, you know, this is going to come down to private workouts. It's going to come down to how he looks at the combine. But realistically, I think Shaedon Sharpe's going to be the apple of the eye for a lot of people, especially NBA GMs between picks 4 and 10. So we'll see where Shane Sharp actually goes on draft night, but I think 7 here to the Kings does make some sense as of right now. Pick 8, New Orleans Pelicans here now at this spot. Of course, what a way for this pick to play out for them, right? They make the playoffs. They also get the Lakers pick this year more than likely, unless 3 teams below them move up in the lottery, which is like a 1% chance, actually less than that, I think 0.1% chance. So the Pelicans here likely going to have this selection from the Lakers. And with this pick, I'm going to have them go with forward AJ Griffin, which is a little counterintuitive here because New Orleans doesn't necessarily need a forward. Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, 2 hits from this last draft. David Griffin did really, save his job with his recent moves in the last 12 months. Drafting Herb Jones, drafting Trey Murphy, trading for CJ McCollum. All 3 of those moves panned out. And I do think that New Orleans is in a better spot now than they were a year ago, for sure. They made the playoffs without Zion Williamson playing. And I don't think they need a forward here, but I think AJ Griffin just clearly the best player available. And if you're New Orleans, you might be looking for some other moves down the road to try and, kind of tighten up your rotations a little bit better. And I think AJ Griffin probably the player that holds the most value between players available yet, just because I think a lot of teams are going to like his skill set. Really good 3-and-D wing, shoots the 3-ball well off of catch and shoot opportunities, is athletic enough to take it to the rim when he wants to, and is also going to be a good defender at the next level. So for me, AJ Griffin, just simply because of value here at this spot, I just think he's the best player available. Number 9, San Antonio here, and a team that I think probably going to get a player who I think is really, really good as well. And actually, I would deem him to be the best player available over AJ Griffin. But I think at this spot, it just doesn't make as much sense for New Orleans to consider a center. Whereas San Antonio, I think they need to consider a center. Jakob Poeltl, he's really good. I think Jakob Poeltl, one of the more underrated bigs in the league. But what I think in reality, I think they're going to look to potentially move on from him. And if they do, Jalen Duren would be a starter on day 1. But even if they do keep him, I think Duren could come off the bench, and you give a different identity here to San Antonio basketball. They're missing a little bit of that power, raw athleticism, and punch. And Jalen Duren's got all of that to him. And he's also very switchable. Kind of reminds me of Bam Adebayo. Now, that's a long-term projectable upside that maybe he'll never get to that. That's kind of what you would deem as a ceiling for Jalen Duren, and that's a hard to attain ceiling. Bam Adebayo is probably the best defensive player in the league right now, and if he's not the best defensive player in the league, he's top 3. And I think Duren has some of the same upside. He's very switchable out in space, can protect the rim well, and has really good lateral mobility for a big. And he's got a pretty good offensive skill set with a swing skill of playmaking. So I think if San Antonio takes him, it might take a while to really unleash the full package from him, kind of like what we saw from Bam. But if they can get it out of him, oh my goodness, watch out. He and DeJounte Murray in the pick and roll is going to be fun to watch for the next decade. Pick 10, Washington. Now on the board, and the Washington Wizards, they're in an interesting spot right now simply because Bradley Beal, everyone's going to wait on him. We're going to see what happens with him. It's very possible he wants out. Very possible he signs a Supermax extension. We don't really know what's going on in Washington. Of course, they got Kristaps Porzingis now. We have not seen Beal and KP play together yet. And I think that might have a big impact on what Beal's really thinking right now. Does he want to play with KP long-term? Does he want to try and go win a championship elsewhere? Does he just want to be in Washington, which I think is a realistic option as well? He does seem to like it there. So Washington, there's a lot of different ways they could look, but I have them going with guard Johnny Davis right now simply because he is BPA, best player available. With him at pick 10, if he's available here, I think a lot of teams are going to be looking at this as a great outcome for them. And I think Washington specifically, they would have to pull the trigger on this. Realistically, it's just, I think he's probably going to be widely considered the best player available at this spot. And really in this mock draft, that's what I'm talking about here with how good these players are. Johnny Davis in other classes might be a top 5 selection, and I have him going pick 10 here. So with him here now at this spot, I think Washington realistically is getting a player who could have a high impact for them. And worst case, I think he ends up being a good bench scorer behind Beal. So even though the upside is immense, the floor here I think is more, you can kind of more afford to take this risk with Johnny Davis if you're Washington, because you do have Bradley Beal. You also have Kyle Kuzma, Rui Hachimura. You do have a nice young core if you're Washington. You're just looking for like a little bit of, sustainability, consistency. We'll see if Porzingis and Beal can give you that. But if not, Johnny Davis, his upside here might be enough to override all the wrongs, assuming that potentially Bradley Beal does leave as well. I think Davis fits either way. Pick 11, New York Knicks now. On the board in New York, one of the harder teams to mock for simply because there's a lot of different outcomes that you could look at. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, we need a point guard. And then Emmanuel Quickley ends the season with a 30-point triple-double. And then some people are saying, maybe Emmanuel Quickley is our point guard of the future. Maybe we need a combo guard who can work off of him. And then, Obi Toppin played great in Julius Randle's absence. Does Julius Randle get traded? We don't know. Mitchell Robinson's also headed toward free agency. So we'll see if he's not back with New York. And that actually did inspire and impact my decision here to mock Walker Kessler to New York, because in Tom Thibodeau's defensive system, you need rim protection. And with Tom Thibodeau seemingly staying put there in New York and the potential that Mitchell Robinson is actually headed elsewhere through free agency, I think Walker Kessler does become a good fit for the New York Knicks, simply because he's one of the best rim protectors in the nation and one of the best rim protectors in this year's draft. Chet Holmgren and Jalen Durham would like to have a conversation about that, but I think Walker Kessler statistically really did stand out. He was voted National Defensive Player of the Year this past year, playing in a tough SEC, and I think his rim protection element would be vital for New York. And then maybe they do just naturally put the ball in Emmanuel Quickley's hands a little bit more, let him and Obi Toppin work offensively. The one thing about Kessler, like Mitchell Robinson, he's just going to play smart offensively. He's going to play efficiently. He's going to take nice shots right around the rim. He's going to be a good screen and roll guy, and he's going to hold down the paint defensively. So Walker Kessler, I think he has a big range in this year's draft, because it's going to come down to how teams really view the importance of his rim protection. I think rim protection is one of the most important elements of basketball, and New York gets a really good one here in this selection. Pick 12, Oklahoma City on the board again. Remember earlier, had them go with Keegan Murray, so they do grab a 4-man, but they still badly need more help in the front court. So pick 12, I have them going with center Mark Williams. We have two centers go back-to-back here in Kessler and Mark Williams, and Mark Williams arguably could be better than Walker Kessler. When you look at Oklahoma City here, I mean, the front court play, it's just not going to get the job done when you have Mike Muscala and Derek Favors as probably your two best front court players right now. Pokusevski plays more like a guard than a big. And realistically, you add a lot of strength and athleticism and size with the selections of Keegan Murray and Mark Williams. I think Oklahoma City does get a lot better with these selections, even though, maybe not the most traditional understanding of how to do things, because they did take Keegan Murray over Jaden Ivey in this mock, but you end up with the combination of Murray and Mark Williams here. And you have to be feeling pretty good about your offense going forward and some of your defensive capabilities as well. Mark Williams, a very athletic big who can protect the rim, and rim runs well to the offensive end of the floor. He's going to be a nice screen and roll guy, which I think Oklahoma City's badly missing. I mean, Derek Favors was their best roll man this year, and I think you need to really upgrade with an athletic profile over that. And Mark Williams, who's one of the bigger risers throughout this process, especially through March Madness, finds himself now going pick 12. Keegan Murray, Mark Williams, those two guys, good front court players, and I think Oklahoma City gets a lot better. You bring Favors off the bench. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl probably takes a little bit of a step forward this next season, and Oklahoma City becomes rather formidable in the West. Pick 13, Charlotte Hornets now on the board, and at this spot, you have to be wondering, how do we get LaMelo Ball and the Charlotte Hornets to win a play-in game? And I think it's got to start on the defensive end of the floor, so I'm going with forward Jeremy Sohan. And Hornets fans might be saying, well, we have a lot of forwards already. We got Gordon Hayward, we got Kelly Oubre, we got PJ Washington. What's the deal with this? I think Gordon Hayward probably gets traded this offseason. There's a lot of speculation about that, and I think there's some legitimacy to that. So for me, I'm mocking forward Jeremy Sohan. I think missing Gordon Hayward is going to actually be a bigger deal for Charlotte than people think. But ultimately, I'm projecting what I think will happen, not necessarily what I would do. And I think forward Jeremy Sohan does make some sense here as well, simply because a team like Charlotte, who does struggle defensively, once there's two bigs off the board in Mark Williams and Walker Kessler, if either of them was available at this spot, I would have mocked them here to Charlotte. Both of them off the board, though, so I go with the next best thing here, which is forward Jeremy Sohan, who did defend a lot of bigs at the collegiate level and actually found a lot of success doing that. He's a very special defensive player, very switchable, and I think maybe does give a little bit more defensive identity to Charlotte, a team that just has given up a ton of points. And that's going to happen when you have LaMelo Ball as your point guard. You're going to give up more points than a lot of other teams, but I think that they still have to carve a defensive identity for this roster and for this organization. I think James Borrego, if he doesn't get that done, probably is going to be out of a job at some point. So I think a selection of Sohan here probably does make some sense for Charlotte. And we'll see if Mitch Kupchak, who I think is one of the best GMs in the NBA, and his selections in Bouknight, Kai Jones, and Sohan can start playing bigger roles into the future. 14, Cleveland here. on the board of this spot. And Cleveland's an interesting team because, of course, they had such a good season, and yet they still missed the playoffs. They got so injured this past year. And I think once you reintroduce Colin Sexton back, you get hopefully a healthy Jarrett Allen, you stay healthy with Evan Mobley for an entire season, and you're going to have a really, really good squad, specifically when you add in forward Ochai Agbaji. Again, this is the same mock selection as last week for Cleveland, just because I think it makes so much sense. You look at Ochai, who's a really, really dependable wing. Now, I don't think he's got as much upside. I liken him a lot to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, which maybe doesn't sound like a great thing, but let's not forget KCP's made nearly $100 million in his career playing basketball because a lot of teams have valued him. A 3-and-D wing is always important in the NBA. And Agbaji, he's been successful in that, and he's won at a very high rate. We know how much Kansas wins. And Agbaji, the last 3 or 4 years, has been really essential in that for Kansas. The Jayhawks have been way better with him on the floor. He's very reliable and dependable, and Cleveland just quite frankly doesn't have that on the wing. They just didn't have it this year. You know, you look at Isaac Okoro, who's a former top 10 pick. And I just don't think his career's come along as the way as a lot of people expected, specifically since he had such a high work ethic coming out of Auburn. I think people expected the shooting to come around a little bit more than it has. Unfortunately, it hasn't. I think Ochai Agbaji instantly becomes a day one starter for Cleveland next year, at least potentially in the starting lineup. And if not, he'd be one of the first guys off the bench. So Agbaji, a really, really good pickup here for Cleveland, even though the upside's not super high. Pick 15, Charlotte again on the board. Remember, they went with Jeremy Sohan at pick 13. And now at 15, I have him going with guard Jaden Hardy. And again, this is a pick based off of upside. If you're looking at Charlotte here, there is a lot of congestion, I would say. Guard position, you know, you got LaMelo Ball. That's your starting point guard. Shooting guard, maybe a little up in the air right now. Of course, you've got Miles Bridges as well at the 3. You look at PJ Washington. I talked about Gordon Hayward already. Draft Jeremy Sohan, you draft Kai Jones, and then you also have Plumlee. So there's a lot of congestion here. And Charlotte, since there's not any bigs available, this does become an interesting spot where maybe they try and look to use pick 15 for a trade for a guy like Jakob Poeltl. And we'll see if that's enough to get a deal done. Maybe it is. But assuming they keep this selection, I'm going with guard Jaden Hardy. I know they took Bouknight last year at the 2. I like Bouknight. I actually had Bouknight very high on my big board, and I still do really believe in his potential as a scorer, but I think Jaden Hardy does make some sense here as well. Gives you another stab on a scoring guard. His efficiencies weren't good this past year for the G League Ignite team, but remember, it's a 12-game sample size. If you're going to put everything into 12 games, even stars throughout certain 12-game stretches of their career don't look like they're that good statistically. I'm not going to overreact to it. This kid was a very high recruit coming out of college. And if you actually watch him, some of the shots he's able to even get off, some of his athleticism, and some of his traits physically do blow you away. So for me with Jaden Hardy, I think Mitch Kupchak, one of the smarter GMs in the NBA, like I said earlier, I think he's going to take the stab here, especially since he has 2 picks in the top 15. Pick 16, Atlanta Hawks here now. And at this spot, Atlanta's going to be in an interesting spot. Last week, I looked at a backup point guard for them, but here I'm going to focus more on the defensive side of the basketball, specifically with their need to add a little bit more physicality in the front court, I think, specifically for perimeter defensive capabilities. And I'm looking at Tari Eason here, who's one of the more athletically intriguing players in this class because he's got a really nice physical profile. He's very strong and athletic. The former Cincinnati Bearcat, who transferred to LSU for his sophomore season, really helped his draft stock by making that transfer. And he's a player who, playing in the SEC this past year, he's going to love staying down in that Southeast region with Atlanta. I do think this makes a lot of sense for Atlanta, just given where they're at with all their contracts. DeAndre Hunter seemingly gets hurt a ton as well. So having another reliable forward to step into the rotation when Hunter's out, it does make a lot of sense. And Tari Eason, I think, a really good selection, 16th overall for Atlanta. Moving into pick 17, Houston Rockets here again. Remember, first overall, we went with Jabari Smith, and 17th here, you could consider point guard, but I have him going with forward EJ Liddell because, again, I think it's about trying to add length, rim protection, and defense for Houston. Again, you can't give up the most points in the league and win games. So for me, if you're Houston, you have to get better defensively. I really did consider point guard. There's a few good ones out here like Dyson Daniels, who could help you on the defensive end of the floor and is a pretty good facilitator. Ty Washington I also considered, but just given the fact that EJ Liddell was still here, I think it does make sense. He averaged nearly 3 blocks a game this past year for the Ohio State Buckeyes. And it's rare to have a forward like that who can protect the rim at the level that he did. I think he's a very smart, intellectual defender who knows how to position himself. And if you're looking for a player to help you defensively with Jeremy Sohan off the board, EJ Liddell does make a lot of sense here. Jabari Smith, Liddell come in, you really tighten up your 4-man spots, and it also opens up your lineup to some potential small ball combinations where you play Jabari Smith technically at the 5, EJ Liddell at the 4. And then you at the 3, maybe a guy like Jayshawn Tate. 2, you play Jalen Green. 1, you play Kevin Porter Jr. You've got some pretty intriguing combination of length, size, athleticism, quickness, speed, and you still have the rim protection element with Liddell and Jabari Smith on the floor. So I think it's an interesting way to build this team. I also still do like Şengün. I think his potential is still very high. He has a lot to, grow yet, I think, at the NBA level. And I also think Usman Garuba is going to take a big step forward next year if he's more available for Houston. So you have a combination of intriguing players, especially after the Liddell pickup. Pick 18, Chicago, now on the board here in the Bulls. I think just a team that's, really desperately in need of more wing talent off the bench. And for me, there's one really talented wing available at this spot, and that's forward Nikola Jovic from Serbia. And for me, a 6'10" forward who can play the 3 or the 4 based on his skill set. He's actually a really good playmaker. He's able to pass the ball with really good velocity. Actually play a little bit of point forward throughout the FIBA U19 World Cup. And I also look at him as a player who's got a lot of talent in his game when it comes to scoring the basketball. He's comfortable putting the ball on the deck, getting to the rim. He's also comfortable knocking down a 3 ball. Now, I think there's a little bit of development for this kid. I think he needs to grow a little bit, especially physically yet. I think he needs to get a little bit stronger to become a consistent difference maker at the NBA level. But realistically, for Jovic, for me, you're looking at a player who I think is going to just be good because his skill set is very defined and NBA ready. So for Chicago, a team that, outside of DeRozan and Levine and Vooch, they don't have a lot of scoring. Patrick Williams has grown, Lonzo Ball's good, Caruso's good, but you look at that forward spot, I just think you need one more guy. And Jovic, to me, I think he is that for Chicago. You could also maybe look defensively here, but I really do like Jovic and his skill set at 18. 19, Minnesota here now. Timberwolves on the board here, and there's a lot of good players left at this spot in the draft. And for me, backup point guard just does make a lot of sense for Minnesota. They've been playing a lot of Jordan McLaughlin, but we've seen come playoff time, his minutes have been very limited. And I don't think Chris Finch trusts him as much in the postseason as he would throughout the regular season. I think it just really goes to show that Minnesota feels like they do need another guard here at this spot. So for me, I am going to go with guard Ty Washington, who's actually taken a little bit of a stumble in my mocks. Was looked at as maybe a top 10 pick, at least a lottery selection, and now I have him down all the way at 19. Only the reasoning why, he's a little bit of a reluctant 3-point shooter. So for where the NBA is at, usually you want your point guard to shoot the 3 ball well. And Ty Washington kind of reminds me of Darren Collison a little bit. Not quite as athletic, not quite as gifted physically, I don't think, but just a player who I think he can knock down the 3 ball. It just takes him a lot of space to be comfortable to actually pull that shot. And I do think it limits your half-court offense a little bit, but luckily here for Minnesota, when you have Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, it's not like you're in need of half-court offense. They were actually one of the most productive offenses in the NBA this past year, specifically after January 1st. So instead, I think what they're looking for here is just a little bit more reliability from the backup point guard spot. And Ty Washington, someone who's very comfortable in the pick and roll. Minnesota runs a lot of pick and roll offense. I think he's a really good fit into that system offensively. And also their blitz defense does actually make Ty Washington a little bit more playable on that end of the floor as the head of your defense. So I think Minnesota actually does make a lot of sense here for a Ty Washington landing spot. Pick 20, San Antonio on the board again. Remember earlier we went with Jalen Duren out of Memphis. That's been the very common pick of mine for San Antonio. And now at 20, I'm looking at forward Kendall Brown here from Baylor. The reason why I think that this makes a lot of sense for them with Tari Eason off the board, I just think they're looking for a little bit of length and athleticism. Kendall Brown's got both of that. He's pretty springy as a jumper. Not the most athletic guy, not super powerful as a jumper, but what he is, he's a quick jumper, and he's also got really good length to him. And he's actually got like a Spursy-esque skill set. And what I mean by that is he's a great connector. Kind of reminds me of Derek White, but as a forward, where he's just, maybe not going to be the best player. You leave him alone in the gym, you're not going to say, wow, this guy's a great shooter, or this guy's got a phenomenal handle, or you're not going to say, oh, wow, this guy's very, very skilled, but he's just going to make all the right decisions. And I think that's a very Spurs-esque type of trait to have. And I think you put him into San Antonio, you give him limited role early in his career, probably plays like 15 minutes a night. But by year 3 or 4, he could be a 25, 28 minutes a night kind of contributor where he plays very, very well in the NBA. And having him go pick 20 does feel low to me. Like I said in the open, Kendall Brown's a good player. Earlier in the year, I thought maybe he could be a top 10 pick. He's kind of fallen out of favor with me a little bit, just simply based on how he finished the season for Baylor. But realistically, I do think he's a player that is going to be very intriguing for a lot of teams, just given that he's a very positionless wing who can do a lot of different things on the floor. 21, Denver now on the board here. And again, a player who I think a lot of people are going to look at as a guy who should go before pick 21. But again, with just how good this class is, it's tough to really see ways that this happens. But I'm looking at guard/forward Malachi Branham. We know how important Will Barton's been for this team, especially over the last half decade. And I think Denver is just in need of a little bit more consistency off the bench when Will Barton's not in the game, specifically since Will Barton is aging a little bit. And I think Malachi Branham is an intriguing grab here. Tim Connolly, one of the best draft and develop GMs in the league. I think he really has a good eye for talent, and taking Branham here does make a lot of sense to me, simply because he's got a good frame. When you look at Denver, I think that they've always kind of lacked a really good perimeter defender. I know they made the trade for Aaron Gordon, but I'm talking more of a guard type defender, one who you'd want to put on maybe a point guard or a two. And Malachi Branham, I think, is going to be a pretty good perimeter defender with some pretty good offensive skill set to him as well. I think he's got to develop in both areas, but again, he's only a freshman. So if you're looking at a young player who I think Denver could draft and develop, like I talked about, I think Malachi Branham does fit the bill here. Pick 22, Memphis Grizzlies here now at this spot. This pick comes from the Utah Jazz in a Mike Conley trade that felt like so long ago, but at this spot, the pick's finally conveying to Memphis. And here they go out and take a player in Ousmane Dieng, who another player I think could realistically end up going in the lottery. It's hard to really nail down where his value is. And realistically, with these guys coming from the overseas routes, sometimes their value does tighten up closer toward the draft, where we have a better feel for where they're going to go. Notice I have them listed as a guard/forward here. Memphis is an interesting team because not only were they a 2 seed this year that was really, really good, but they have 2 impactful players headed toward free agency in Kyle Anderson and Tyus Jones. So you might say, oh, how do we replace them? Ousmane Dieng actually maybe can replace both of them because he's bigger. He's similar in stature to Kyle Anderson, but he's got a fairly similar skill set to Tyus Jones and actually just to Kyle Anderson. And well, I'd say, because he can get downhill, can play make for others. Not the fastest player, but he's got just good intangibles to him. He knows how to play the game. And I think the drive and kick style of the NBA is going to be a really good fit for him. I think he's going to be more valuable than pick 22. He has struggled as a 3-point shooter, though. So that's partially why I have him going as low as 22 here in this mock, simply because, you put him in the gym, he's not going to be the best shooter. I don't think he's going to impress a ton of people in his shooting workouts. And I think that maybe does become a red flag for him. But realistically, Memphis gets a very good player at this spot in the draft. 23, Brooklyn Nets here now. This pick comes from Philadelphia, and I have them going with guard Dyson Daniels, which is maybe surprising here. And for those that have been watching the channel, you should know that I'm not very far apart on my thoughts on Ousmane Dieng and Dyson Daniels. Daniels a little bit better of a defensive player, not quite as big as Dieng though, and I think not quite as good of a playmaker, and maybe not as dynamic when it comes to getting downhill to the rim. But Dyson Daniels, I know a lot of people really do like him because of his defensive upside. Again, as of right now, I think he's a player with a very wide range, because we've seen in the past with players like Emmanuel Mudiay and maybe Frank Ntilikina, where these players who are bigger guards, who are maybe more defensive minded, they get looked at fairly well in the draft, and then those players just haven't worked out. So it's hard for me to look at Dyson Daniels and say another team's going to spend a lottery pick on him. But at the same time, I think it is possible. Last week I had him going 11th, and this week I have him going 23rd. I think I do need to tighten up exactly where I view this guy going. But for me with Dyson Daniels, versatile defensive player. The idea here for Brooklyn is you do get another playmaker. I know Ben Simmons is maybe going to come back soon, but realistically, one player just doesn't change your whole franchise. I think they still need a little bit more length from the guard position, and I think they do need another creator for when Kevin Durant and or Kyrie Irving are not in the game. So Dyson Daniels, Ben Simmons, those two guys can maybe come in for each other actually, and you have a full 48 minutes out of those two, and that's a pretty intriguing pickup here for me for Brooklyn. 24, Milwaukee Bucks here now. at this spot, and it's a pretty good opportunity here to grab a talented guard in Kennedy Chandler, who again falls, I think, too low. 24 just feels too low for Kennedy Chandler, but at the same time I look at these and I'm like, well, 22 feels too low for Ousmane Dieng, 23 feels a little low for Dyson Daniels, but at the same time I can't say, oh, I think I should move Ochai Agbaji down from 14. You know, if you're moving someone up, it means you have to move someone down. So it's really tough to go through that because I'm trying to think about fit, and for me, the 6-foot guard is probably the guy who takes a bigger fall when it comes to physicals throughout the combine, throughout the offseason where we get closer to the draft, because the teams are going to look at him and say, well, he is a little bit smaller. We're a little bit more limited with him on the floor, maybe in terms of switchability. But what I do like about Kennedy Chandler is he can get downhill whenever he wants to, and is also a pesky defender, simply because he's able to pick up 94 feet, very quick hands, quick feet, can move through screens well, very good maneuverability. And changes directions well, both on offense and defense. So he's an intriguing player, played really well for FIBA USA U19 World Cup team. They ended up winning gold. He was a big reason why. Kennedy Chandler's a good player. And for Milwaukee to get him 24 gives you almost another Drew Holiday type player. He's not going to be as good as Drew, but I think he's going to have a really nice skill set at the NBA level. 25, San Antonio here now on the board. And if you're looking at San Antonio here with what we've already grabbed, Jalen Duren and also Kendall Brown, 25th, this pick comes from Boston in the Derek White trade, and I'm actually looking at forward Patrick Baldwin. For San Antonio, I just want to add more length and size. Patrick Baldwin, a 6'10" forward, played for Milwaukee this past year, was also part of that USA U19 World Cup team that won gold. And, you know, he's a solid player. He didn't really play a huge role in that team, kind of just was more of a floor spacer and shooter. But if you're San Antonio, that's probably what you're looking for here. A little bit more floor spacing, shooting from a 4-man, kind of makes Jakob Poeltl and Patrick Baldwin a pretty good, interesting front court pairing. Baldwin, I think, has a lot of areas to grow in, but again, this is pick 25. You're not going to find a player that's an all-world type player. And I think Patrick Baldwin, even though he does have quite strong weaknesses, his strengths, which are size and shooting, are a pretty unique blend that make him intriguing for a first-round selection, and San Antonio takes him 25th overall here. Moving on to 26, we got my Dallas Mavericks here now at the spot. For those who do not know, if you're a Mavs fan, make sure to leave a like on today's video and also subscribe because I'm a Mavs fan as well. And let's go ahead here and look at the Mavs. And I'm actually mocking someone who's a new introduction into the first round. That's center Ismail Kamagate from France, playing in Paris this year. And he's very intriguing. You know, when you look at the Mavericks, I think after the Kristaps Porzingis trade, the biggest concern I had was rim protection. And we've kind of seen how Rudy Gobert can dominate a series, even without really scoring the basketball consistently, because we know he doesn't have the best half-court offensive skill set. But think about, like, if you had to go against a DeAndre Ayton or Nikola Jokic, or whoever it is, if you have to go up against a dominant big man, the Mavs, I just don't think have answers to that right now. Dwight Powell, sure, he's solid. I think Ismail Kamagate could have a higher upside, higher long-term projectable ceiling than Dwight Powell because he's got some of the similar offensive characteristics. He's athletic, can move well downhill. He's going to be a good screen and roll big. But he's had some dominant performances defensively as a rim protector. Now, I know Dwight Powell's looked really good coming off his torn Achilles, and I want to give him a shout out for that. That's a really tough thing to recover from, and I think he's actually almost better now than he was before the injury. But realistically, you know, for the Mavericks, they need more rim protection, even if it's coming off the bench behind Powell to start his career. I think Kamagate is an interesting grab here, 26th overall. Pick 27, Miami Heat here now. With this selection, of course, they did win the tiebreaker between them and Golden State. So Miami now picking 27. Golden State got moved back to 28. And the Heat, with this selection, I have them going with center Trayce Jackson-Davis from Indiana. He played a lot of 4 this year for Indiana, but realistically, I view him as a 5 at the NBA level. He's maybe a little undersized, but he makes up for it with athleticism, speed, quickness, and understanding of the game. Really good shot blocking timing as well. There was a lot of dominant performances from him for Indiana on the defensive side of the ball. And I think offensively fits really well as a screen and roll big. If you're looking at Miami, I think Trayce Jackson-Davis can be switchable. So when Bam Adebayo's out of the game, or if he misses time with injury again, like he did this season, Trayce Jackson-Davis, I think, is a valuable pickup here. I know a lot of people probably don't look at him as a first-round talent. And, you know, realistically, I think he's fairly one-dimensional, doesn't really shoot the 3 ball. But Miami, with Dwayne Dedmon headed toward free agency, I do think this team badly needs a backup big. Omer Yurtseven's probably ready to take another step forward, but it's not like you want to run your depth down to only Bam Adebayo and Omer Yurtseven. You want to have a third guy in there, Trayce Jackson-Davis. I think he's very playable. He's a little bit of an older prospect. He's a junior coming out of Indiana, but realistically, at the end of the day, I think he's a good option here for the Heat. 28, Golden State here now on the board, and with this selection, I do have them looking at forward Trevor Keels. And I know some Warriors fans are going to say, we don't need another forward. Realistically, probably not, but this is an upside value pick here at this spot. Trevor Keels, a player who his range probably starts around 20, and I think getting him 28th here does make some sense. Simply, when you look at it, he's a strong physical wing who's able to drive the basketball. He's going to knock down open jump shots, and he's going to be very versatile defensively. I think he can guard 2 through 4 at the NBA level. And for Golden State, a team that took Jonathan Kuminga last year, they got Draymond Green, they've got Andrew Wiggins. You might say, oh, they don't need another forward. Well, they don't really need a guard either, if we're going to be honest about it. With Jordan Poole, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson. And you also probably would argue they don't even need a center if they're able to keep Kevon Looney, because they also have James Wiseman in the fold, and Draymond Green does play a lot of minutes at the small ball center position. So Trevor Keels, I think Golden State's versatile and flexible, and here they should just target best player available, especially when it's a young freshman coming out of Duke like Trevor Keels. They've talked about how they want to be the Spurs, and I think Trevor Keels is actually a selection that does help them kind of extend their long-term window moving forward, even after the dust settles maybe on Steph and Klay's career and Draymond's career. You would have a combination of Wiggins and Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody. You also have Jordan Poole, Trevor Keels, James Wiseman. I mean, that's a pretty good young core. You probably need to add a little bit more into that to get back to the contention, but realistically, that's a pretty good starting point that you'd want to have, and I think Keels does have a pretty nice future in the league. 29, Memphis again on the board. Remember, we went with Ousmane Dieng, 22nd overall, and 29th here, I have them going with Wendell Moore Jr., and he's just a player that feels like a Memphis Grizzly, right? He's smart. He's going to make a lot of the right decisions, really improved as a playmaker this past year for Duke. And we have a lot of Duke players going in this draft, from Paolo Banchero to Trevor Keels most recently, to Wendell Moore Jr., to Mark Williams. There's a lot of talented Duke kids in this class. And I think, and AJ Griffin, we actually had 5 go in the first round. And that's crazy. That's how good this Duke program is. But Memphis here, Zach Kleiman, one of the smartest GMs in the league. I really do believe that. I think he really has a good understanding of basketball. You're just looking to add a little bit more strength, size, physicality. And I think Wendell Moore Jr. is actually a pretty versatile player as well. Like I said, the playmaking improvement, I think, was huge for his draft stock. It really took him from a guy who maybe would have went in the 50s to potentially a first round pick. I see him going in the top 40 for sure. And in this week's mock, I have him going 29th. Moving on to pick 30, Oklahoma City Thunder here now again. With their other picks, we went Keegan Murray, and then also I believe it was Mark Williams. So now 30th overall here. How does Oklahoma City come through and really add to this roster? And it's a team that struggled with shooting. Oklahoma City just doesn't have a ton of shooting on this roster. So I'm going to add one of the better shooters in this class in Hugo Bassan. And some people might go look up his stats and say, oh, how are you going to say this guy's one of the better shooters? He's shooting like 32% from 3 in the NBL. Well, first of all, the NBL is a very tough league to play in. We've seen it from LaMelo Ball. We've seen it from Josh Giddey. First of all, this is a very Sam Presti-esque pick where he's going to go overseas and bring in a guy like Hugo Bassan. We've seen that a lot from him as of late. And I think Hugo Bassan's a player who's going to take a massive step forward in the NBA just because there's going to be more spacing. There's going to be a little bit more screen and roll action. He's a very good screen and roll guard. And you look at the scouting profile I have up of him on the channel, and you're going to be pretty impressed with some of the clips you see from this kid. I think he's a player who's should be ranked way above where I think he maybe will go in the draft. At certain points, I've looked at him as potentially a lottery pick. I think with where this class is currently at, he's not getting as much love as maybe he deserves, but I'm not ruling it out yet that love will come around for him. But as of right now, I feel a little bit less confident that he'll go in the lottery. But I still think he's a first round player, even though I'm really the only one saying that. I still think that there's a good chance he goes in the first round. Thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the content today. Again, I do put a lot of work into these mock drafts, so if you do enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, also hit that notification bell for more on the channel. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.